categories right now. We could say in the old days, cat piss would have been a chemical. Now OG Kush would be a fuel. And Floral, we talked about hazes or super lemon haze or anything that has really, its terpenolines connected to it, but it's this equatorial feel. Earths are more like Bubbas and Masters and MK Ultras. And fruit is anything fruit. Stone fruit, grape, doesn't make a difference. Citrus. So after seeing so much cannabis for so long, I just saw this pattern emerge. And so what happened was, we go forward into the world, and I'm trying to identify varieties and understand how we can say this is this thing, because we didn't have DNA at that point, right? So I didn't have DNA tools. And I was developing these massive libraries, and we're trying to say, hey, is this this or is this that? And so you could grow it out, but what was the proof? And so what I did is I went to a university, and I hired some non-tenured professors, and we started trying to map cannabis by metabolites, because that was the only fingerprint that I could think we could use. And you can use leaf printing, you can use morphological view to really give you an image, but the thing is, we knew cannabis was contaminated, and we knew, like, you could tell cannabis had changed, cuts had changed, so we knew they must be holding some pathogen, and what happens is it changes the shape of the plant, which makes leaf printing inaccurate. So so you're having all these problems trying to use existing tools, and you need tools that don't exist. And so I try to do it by metabolite mapping. And we spent some time trying to map by metabolites, but what I found was that metabolites move due to stress. And so you could never consistently say that this fingerprint was the same in any place. Even run to run, minors can move. So how can it be an accurate fingerprint if it's variable? And so it made me realize that looking at metabolites was a task best served by stepping back. And by spending so much time and money investing in these science teams, you start to get a really good idea that scent isn't comprised of a singular component. And so what we have is we have this emphasis on terpenes. And so people suddenly, just like cannabinoids, you hear the word THC, you have a number, all of a sudden you're brilliant, you know about strong pot. And all of a sudden you hear that there's this word called terpenes, and it means that pot smells, and this is what's important. And the problem is that only floral as a category is terpene driven. And so earth, fuel, and fruit are thiol ester driven. So things we don't even measure are what's creating the impact to you as a consumer. And so the idea that we're going to use this 42,000 grouping of things, this molecular group we call terpenes, to identify and mark something where it only might have 15 to 20% of the total impact doesn't really make any sense. And so I kind of understood this intuitively because I had moved weed for so long. And then I'm hiring teams of scientists to help me map, and we're going down the wrong road and we're hitting walls left and right. So it's making me realize that it's too complicated to look at in a singular form. It has to be looked at in synthesis. And so I went back to my 4 categories just to make it easy to understand that we can't use these tools until we have DNA. And what took place next was I created a cannabis competition called the Golden Tarp Awards. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to create a competition that used lab analytics to neck the population down so the judges only had to judge 16. But you're getting 250 entries in. And so you can't have a 250 entry cup in a single day. And the goal was a single day. And so I said, well, if we just do the numbers for total metabolites, total cannabinoids, then it becomes a number dominant cup only, and it favors fuel category, because fuel is where the numbers are always the highest. If you want to see big numbers, it's always in gas. And so I said, well, how do I get around me truncating the population and only favoring one demographic? And I said, whoa, if I put my 4 categories over the top of it, I'd be able to have a look at the 4 divisions of cannabis, and the top 4 of each one would be measured through total metabolite, total cannabinoid, but then the judges would determine what they liked best. And what that did was it allowed me to have earths, which typically come in like 12, 13, 14, fruits 15, 16, 17, florals 24 to 25, and then fuels up to 31 go head to head evenly. And so what it did now is it allowed me to be able to have people who love, they said, listen, my variety is awesome, but I know it can't win a numbers cup, but it can definitely be compared against its own in a division, and then by consumption, we can judge the end result. And so the result of this was this really successful cannabis competition. And it was the second largest competition in the United States. So for all the years we ran it, the only thing that was larger than us was the Emerald Cup. And so we came right out of the gate and destroyed every High Times Cup, every Dope Cup. Like, we got a buy-in that was unreal because people could understand that we were really trying to showcase the flower in a pretty easy to see manner. And what we did different was we allowed regular people to come in and be the judges. So I had pros that came in, but when you went to the event, you'd spin this big tumbler and out would come a golden ball. You and a guest would get whisked away to the judging area, and we would take care of you for 10 hours, and you would experience a different party than the other people did. But what it did is it let people who weren't professional cannabis people be exposed to high-level herb, and then be able to be judgmental in a way that we said, what we want to know is just what do you like most. You don't have to be professional because you're a user, you smoke it. When you definitely have an opinion. And so we got a really good buy-in that the event was killer. And then I get approached by a scientific group from University of California, Los Angeles. And they said, hey, you know, what's your proof on your theory? And I said, I don't really have any. I just have intuition, and I know that I've used my categorization to create libraries, and it lets me look at markets. And I said, I know the tool works for me in a number of ways, and I've used it successfully for decades, but I have no proof that cannabis really breaks up into 4 categories. But what I have is I have a massive data set that I'll give you, and you guys can take it back to the lab and you can examine it and tell me what's up. And when they came back, they were like, it's 4 categories. And so what it did is they were already trying to map cannabis heavily, similarly to me, but they didn't have the understanding of cannabis to understand that the earth category was not a faulty category, that earth was really representing cannabis plants that came from regions that required lower levels of cannabinoids and metabolites to survive. And so what you have to do is you have to kind of step back again and realize, well, if we can look at plants and how they produce profiles, we know that the profiles are directly a result of survival response to their native areas. And we also know that humans steered and worked within those profiles for their desires. And so when you start to really look at profiles, you can kind of go back to the source of origin and see what the intent of the cannabis use was by the people who selected and sifted. So anything equatorial is always energetic and cerebral, because when you're warm and fed, usually you're not trying to be on narcotics. But when you're living in the high deserts and life is tough and you're trying to ration a cup of water and you're having to walk 24 kilometers to go kill a goat, you typically are having a harder life, and that's where all our we would call narcotic cannabis comes from. So I started putting that hypothesis on top of the categorical hypothesis. And what happens next is the scientific team from UCLA, now that they fully believe that we see 4 clear categories, they looked at a study that had been done by a man named Dr. Nasha. And the study was a